Hi there, I'm Shawna Robins, founder and CEO of Third Spark, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Stephen Gundry. He's the director of the International Heart and Lung Institute in Palm Springs, California, and founder and director of the Center of Restorative Medicine in Palm Springs and Santa Barbara. After a distinguished surgical career as a professor and chairman of sorry, I'm saying
Cardiothoracic. That's a good one.
cardio or thoracic surgery
Thoracic.
at Loma Linda University, Dr. Gundry changed his focus to curing modern diseases with dietary changes. He's written so many best-selling books, I just don't even know. I'm going to try and list them off. The Gut Check, Unlocking the Keto Code, The Energy Paradox, The Plant Paradox, The Family Cookbook, The Longevity Paradox, The Plant Paradox Quick and Easy, The Plant Paradox Cookbook, and The Plant Paradox, and has written more than 300 articles published in peer-reviewed journals on using diet and supplements to eliminate heart disease, diabetes, autoimmune disease, and multiple other diseases. Dr. Gundry, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thanks for having me. That was a mouthful.
Oh, and I cut it short, right? I mean, it's amazing the things that you've done. You've just been such a wonderful influence on so many people.
Well, thanks. Thanks. I got to keep working, so what the heck? Might as well do something useful while I'm working, right?
Yeah, exactly. All right. So, of course, given my interest in sleep and the women that I help with sleep, the first thing I want to talk to you about is the idea of this gut sleep connection. Can you enlighten me a little bit on how the gut is related to sleep, sleep problems, sleep disturbances, insomnia, that sort of thing?
Sure. In fact, it's interesting. One of my long-term friends is Ariana Huffington, who wrote a whole book on sleep after she realized that she probably should maybe get more than 3 hours of sleep every night. And it uh, took her collapsing and hitting her head to be a wake-up call for her, bad pun. But there's a lot of really interesting connections between the gut and sleep. And it's actually in many levels. I'll give you one interesting example. Uh, my wife and I spend a lot of time going back and forth to Europe for various reasons. She once had a handbag and accessory store, and all of her designers were in Paris and Nice and Florence and Milan, and doggone it, had to go meet with designers all the time. And I study super old people, among other things, and there are a lot of them are located in the blue zones over there. So anyhow, people always ask us, doesn't jet lag get you? And we both look at whoever asks us, and no, we've never had jet lag. And they go, well, but that's impossible. And well, it's not. It turns out that we all know about circadian rhythms, that there are certain ebbs and flows of, among other things, our energy during the day. But many people aren't aware that the gut has its own circadian rhythm, and that the gut microbiome actually has its own circadian rhythm. And one of the fun things I've played with for a while, particularly with Gundry MD, is you can actually dose probiotics and give probiotics what they want to eat, and actually, I think, change your circadian rhythm from one time zone to another just by manipulating probiotics, friendly bacteria, and giving them what they want to eat. So that's one thing that has surprised, I guess, shouldn't have surprised me, but I guess surprises me, that we don't get jet lag. And it's because of years of fiddling with that one thing.
So, what foods do you find help the gut create its own circadian rhythm when you're traveling?
So I think number one, uh, I got interested in polyphenols a very long time ago, at a time when polyphenols, for those who don't know, are in general plant compounds. These are these brightly colored, darkly colored uh, pigments in fruits and vegetables that were once thought to be antioxidants, and they're not. Let's get rid of that thought. It turns out that polyphenols are designed by plants to protect themselves from sun damage and from environmental damage. And I wrote a whole book about it called The Energy Paradox. And polyphenols in plants um, protect mitochondria, and they do so by uncoupling mitochondria, and we won't go down that road because it's a whole book worth of explaining. Anyhow, the more you protect mitochondria, the better they do. So we know that when we eat polyphenols, polyphenols are very poorly absorbed, all these wonderful colors. And there's always been a question, well, we don't absorb them very well, and yet we know they have health benefits. What's going on? And it wasn't until a few years ago that it was discovered that our gut microbiome loves polyphenols, and they eat the polyphenols. And so polyphenols are actually prebiotics that no one even guessed was why you might want to eat these things. And it turns out that when gut bacteria eat these polyphenols, they thrive, number one, but they convert these polyphenols into compounds that we can then absorb. And so polyphenols are really one of the best ways to help our mitochondria and improve our mitochondrial performance. And speaking of bad things that happen to us as we get older, many of us are convinced that mitochondrial dysfunction is really what's behind, for instance, memory loss or lack of energy or muscle power. So why not give bacteria what they want to eat, which is polyphenols, and then have the bacteria help us get the benefits of polyphenols? The bacteria are the intermediary between the plant and us. So,
I like
yeah.
that. When you say polyphenols, I think of the berries, the blueberries, blackberries, raspberries. Give me some other ideas of what polyphenols are that you're referring to.
Well, so they're in all sorts of dark colored, for instance, dark green leafy vegetables are actually loaded with polyphenols as well. Strikingly, I'm having a cup of green tea right now. Tea is loaded with polyphenols. Coffee is loaded with polyphenols. The benefit of several of the nuts, particularly walnuts, are the polyphenol content in the nut. So it's not just fruits, it's all, and spices. Spices are just loaded with polyphenols. Fun fact, cloves have the highest level of polyphenols of any of the spices.
Interesting.
Who knew?
Yeah, wonderful. All right, great. So when it comes to polyphenols, do you prefer that people take a supplement to help their gut bacteria, or would you rather have them eat whole foods? Or what's your thought on that?
All of the above. We know that ancient hunter-gatherers probably were interacting and eating about 250 different plant species on a rotating basis. And all those plants were grown in, 6 feet of loam soil. They were all organic. And as we used to joke, if you really think that you can ingest 250 different plant species on an ongoing yearly basis, I have oceanfront property in Palm Springs that I'd like to sell you. It can't be done. And so anytime, yes, the more of these dark colored, vibrant colored foods that we can eat, the better. the more spices that we can add to our life, the better. I made a pitch in the last book, Gut Check, and in my current book, uh, The Gut-Brain Paradox, which will be out in April, that spices are really an underutilized way of getting these polyphenols into us. And there's a really cool thing about spices that maybe I won't tell you yet because the book's not out, but maybe we will. And then finally, supplements. I got into making Vital Res was my first supplement, and it was a way of getting the beneficial polyphenols of fruits and vegetables into people without all the sugar. Because sadly, most of our fruits, particularly, have been bred for sugar content. And that's unfortunate. So I took the sugar out, kept the polyphenols, and the rest is history. And that's actually how Vital Reds came about. And Vital Reds also has 4 different probiotics that the polyphenols then feed. So
All right, well, I'm glad you brought up your book. I definitely want to question you about it. You can release whatever information you'd like to, since it's not out yet. But I was hoping you could just kind of give me an overview of what it's going to be like. You know, you've touched on so many topics with your other books. But I think the gut-brain axis is such an interesting topic, not only from the sleep point of view, but just for the general health of and longevity for people. So could you tell me a little bit about it?
just to think, brain told the gut what to do. Um, we, I was taught in medical school that this large nerve that runs from the brain down to the various organs, including the gut, the vagus nerve, was kind of how the brain told the gut what to do. And lo and behold, a few years ago, we realized that for every fiber that in the vagus nerve from the brain to the gut going down, there were 9 fibers from the gut to the brain going up. And we went, oops. Clearly, women have known this for years. You guys have a gut sense that men seem to be clueless about. But so when that was discovered, people started looking at the nerves in the gut and discovered that there were more neurons in the gut, in the abdomen, than there were in the entire spinal cord. So that's where the idea of this gut-brain axis came about. Fast forward, and we started looking at, well, the neurons are making all these really cool compounds like dopamine, like serotonin, like GABA. And these are all, having an impact on brain, on sleep. And then come to find out that with the Human Microbiome Project, that lo and behold, it wasn't the neurons that were making all these compounds. It was actually the gut bacteria that were making all these compounds. And so now it's more correct to say the microbiome gut-brain axis,
Mm.
but that's hard to say. So most of us just use the gut-brain axis. But the important part is, and the book is really trying to convince everybody that much of what happens in our brain on a day-to-day basis, much of what happens in our thinking processes, in our moods, is actually driven by the gut microbiome rather than these wonderful thoughts we have in our brain. And there's so much increasing evidence of that happening. A few books ago, I thought one of the easy ways to explain this was that the human genome is actually incredibly small. We don't have a whole lot of genes. In fact, believe it or not, corn has more genes than we do. The sand flea that we see running around our beaches here in Santa Barbara has more genes than a human, more chromosomes. And this, you go, what? How can that be? So one of the things we have is that our microbiome is 100 trillion different little cells, little organisms. And the computing power of that microbiome, they're constantly dividing, they're constantly changing, the genes are constantly being exchanged between bacteria, between viruses. And many of us think that what we've done, that we could all relate to, is we've uploaded most of the computing power that drives this organism to our microbiome.
Hmm.
And uh, you and I, there's a cloud up there receiving all this information that we take for granted now. And yet we had no idea there was a bacterial cloud inside of us that is great at information processing. And I make the case in the gut-brain paradox that we've got this bacterial cloud that's doing, unbeknownst to us, most of this computing processing, and that much of our behavior, good and bad, is determined by our gut microbiome.
Hmm.
Wow.
Fantastic. I can't wait to read this book. Um, where do I go from here? Right? It's like, is this the future of science?
Yeah.
Instead of having blood work, are we going to go have stool samples and have our microbiome mapped so that we can understand what's going on inside our body? I mean, what is the future here?
No, I think that's true. Personalized medicine, I think, will get to the point. First of all, we didn't even know these guys really existed until the Human Microbiome Project in 2010 to 2017, when it was completed. We didn't even know these guys existed. Um, and we didn't know what they did. And with each passing year, not only doing or beginning to get who these guys are, but what exactly they do. And it's getting down to really nitty-gritty stuff. So, for instance, in the book, we know that people who have anxiety, for instance, have a specific microbiome that's specific, and they're producing, the lack of a better word, chemicals or messages that produce anxiety. And it's manipulable because we can do an animal model and change those bacteria. And lo and behold, the anxiety goes away or gets worse. We know that there's a depressive microbiome and that we can manipulate that. I got interested in this because early on, a number of my patients who I was seeing for other reasons were just coincidentally on antidepressants or anti-anxiety meds or sleep meds.
Hmm.
And interesting, as we progressed for another reason, they go, you're not going to believe this, but I'm off my antidepressants. And, my mind works so much better. And I hope you don't mind if I'm off my antidepressants. And I'm going, well, of course not. And then you go, well, what did we do that got you off of your antidepressants? And now we know that it was manipulating the microbiome that did it. And I have a whole chapter on addictive behavior. And it turns out that we've known that food addiction behavior is driven by the microbiome. That's pretty well documented. But one of the real revelations of the book is that alcohol addiction is, in fact, driven by the microbiome. Opioid addiction is driven by the microbiome. Cigarette addiction is driven by the microbiome. And the really exciting thing is that you, rather than sending someone to therapy or rehab, which, no offense, the recidivism rate of rehab for drug or alcohol addiction is about 90%. We can actually go after the real culprit in all this,
Mhm.
which is the gut microbiome, dysbiosis and leaky gut, and maybe have a much stronger impact,
Hmm.
hopefully.
Hmm.
So,
That would be an absolute miracle if that's
yeah,
something legitimately can be absorbed by the general public, and made to be easy with very low barriers of entry for people
correct.
to learn and to understand and have their own microbiome mapped, and then the ways that they can tweak it to be able to get the health results that they're looking for. So this always comes up, I know, in questions that I get from my clients, but what do you think about probiotic use? I mean, do you feel like it's legitimate? Do you know that the strains are even alive? How do you know about quality? How do you know if your body's using them? It seems to be, some people feel that it's just a lot of money down the drain. Other people feel like it is a saving grace for them. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, as I wrote about in Gut Check, uh, dead men may tell no tales, but dead bacteria do tell tales. And that was a real revelation of looking at postbiotics. So probiotics are quote unquote friendly bacteria. Most probiotics, number one, are not native to our gut, and most of them do not survive gastric acid. Uh, if they do survive, and we have tricks to getting them past gastric acid that we use at Gundry MD and other people use. But if they survive, they're basically on vacation for a couple of weeks and kind of hanging out and enjoying the beach down in our colon, and then they leave. And so most probiotics that you're going to swallow and make it definitely need to be replaced every now and then, fairly frequently. That's number one. Number two, we know that what happens, one of the most enlightening parts of probiotics, there's a very famous probiotic now called Akkermansia muciniphila.
I was going to ask you about the GLP-1 probiotics. That's on my list.
Mucus-loving Akkermansia. And what's interesting, this bug was kind of the holy grail of probiotics for good health. And it's been known about for 15 years, but nobody could grow it. And it, it's it's a wonderful, heartwarming story, but this scientist at Pendulum Life, because she had a daughter with some issues, kind of quit her job in the tech industry and spent 10 years growing Akkermansia and did it. And it's a wonderful achievement. But what's interesting, and I've written about this, you can swallow dead Akkermansia
Mhm.
and achieve much the same effect
Mhm.
as swallowing the live one. And you go, what the heck? Well, what's interesting is bacteria uh, see, they think. People don't like me to say that. They don't see and think like we do, but they do. And so they, among other things, know who's in the vicinity. They know which bacteria is living next door. They can actually read the barcode on the surface of a bacteria. And it's just like a photo identification now when you through passport control. You don't even have to show anything. Oh, that's your face. And the computer recognizes it. And so the bacteria go, oh, so a dead Akkermansia comes along and the other bacteria says, oh, Akkermansia is in the house. That's cool. Let's make this, let's make that. And so most of the people who are thinking they're eating probiotics in their yogurt or their kombucha, no, you're not. Don't even worry about it. But you're drinking or eating postbiotics, and the other things that came from that, which were short chain fatty acids, and those are actually the important things. So don't sweat too much about whether you're eating dead bacteria or living bacteria. Number one, how's that?
Take it. Just take it, right?
Just take it.
All right.
The other thing we have learned, and I spend a lot of time in the last few books trying to convince people, is we've learned that there are certain really important bacterial products, postbiotics, that are really important for our health, for our brain. And these are short chain fatty acids, like butyric acid. And butyrate is another one of these holy grails that the more we know about it, the more important it is. For instance, the lining of our colon is only one cell thick, and it's all that stands between us and everything we swallow and all these bacteria. And oddly enough, the colonocytes, which are these cells, 80% of all their energy comes from butyrate, not from oxygen, not from blood flow. What they have to absorb is butyrate to grow. And what's striking about that, if people are paying attention, we now know we have a generation of people who are developing colon cancer in their 30s and 40s. And we now hear a recommendation, oh, well, instead of colonoscopy at 50, you should get it at 45, and soon we'll get colonoscopy at 40. And you go, well, what's with that? Well, it turns out that we know in the absence of butyrate that these colon cells get cranky and irritable and are kind of starving, and they get dysplastic. And there's very strong correlation between the lack of butyrate and this cancerous change. And there's strong correlation between butyrate preventing colon cancer. So, long story short, we're a generation, several generations now, that we haven't been making butyrate because, number one, we don't have the type of bacteria that will do it. And number two, we haven't given these bacteria what they need to eat.
Seed and feed. That's what I call it.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
I used to, in my office in Palm Springs, I use the example of, let's suppose I sell people grass seed, and they come back 3 months later and they said, you sold me bad grass seed, it didn't grow. And I said, well, what did you do? Well, I took it out to the desert and I spread it around and it didn't grow. I said, well, did you water it? Well, no, you didn't tell me to. Did you fertilize it? No, you didn't tell me to. I said, well, what did you expect? And it's the same thing. We could take all the probiotics in the world, but if we don't give them what they need to eat, and we don't give it the precursors like postbiotics that they need to turn into other compounds, it'll never work. Yeah, so seed and feed, you're right.
Yeah, and postbiotics, that's a new term I haven't heard. What is
So postbiotics are originally postbiotics were the products of bacterial fermentation of prebiotics. And they were, and I wrote a whole book, The Energy Paradox, all about it. They were gases. For instance, nitric oxide is a postbiotic. Methane is a postbiotic. Hydrogen sulfide, the rotten egg smell, is a postbiotic. And these things are actually very important, and they're messaging systems. Then we discovered these compounds like short chain fatty acids, like butyrate, like acetic acid, vinegar, propionic acid, that also are messaging systems. And they literally are the way bacteria talk to our cells. They're the way bacteria talk to our brain. And they are now called postbiotics. There is some movement in some groups to call dead bacteria postbiotic for the same reason, because they clearly contain messages. But yeah, so it turns out that postbiotics are the most important of all of this, and we didn't even know they existed up until a few years ago. It gets even more interesting. I spoke a little bit about it in Gut Check. I spend much more time talking about it in the gut-brain paradox, is we now know that gut bacteria can pop out little packets of information, pieces of genetic instructions, uh, chromosomes, even mitochondria, and put them in little packets that will go through the wall of the gut, that will go through the blood-brain barrier. And they're variously called exosomes or extracellular vesicles, ECVs. And as strange as it may seem, there are actually societies dedicated to the study of these. In fact, recently I was in Malta for the Society of Extracellular Vesicles, where I was lecturing. And you talk about nerdy stuff, but it turns out that these things are, again, a language, a communication system that we didn't even know existed. My best way to explain this is we used to think that mice did not talk, silent as a mouse, and that, well, why would they talk? Well, it turns out that mice have a very complex language and they talk all the time. Unfortunately, their vocalizations are in the ultrasonic frequency and we can't hear it. But you slow it down and, I mean, they're little chatterboxes. So there's an example. Just because we didn't hear it doesn't mean it didn't exist. And we now know we've discovered this incredible communication system and of plants and bacteria having a system of telling us what to do. And we just didn't know it existed because we didn't have the measurement tools to, but now we do, and we go, wow, this is so much more complex than we could have possibly imagined. And then you start going, well, who's working for who?
Of course.
Who's driving the bus? And we've known for a number of years that, for instance, there are obesogenic bacteria and there are lean bacteria. And we know that obesogenic bacteria can literally take over our desires and make us seek out the foods that they want. And same way with actually lean bacteria. We know that if we give lean bacteria the compounds that they want, they'll actually tell our brain, hey, we're great down here. You don't have to go looking for any more food. We're in good shape. So a lot of us thinking smart humans say, oh, that's ridiculous. We're the most advanced creature of all time. And the idea that little one-celled animals could have any effect on this marvelous, temple of knowledge is just more than most of us can take. But get over it.
Exactly. Trillions, 100 trillion.
100 trillion.
More than stars in the Milky Way. I mean,
there are actually more bacteria in your gut, 8 times more bacteria in your gut than all the plants, all the trees, all the plants on Earth. 8 times more bacteria. I mean, that's a lot of bacteria.
Yeah, we are a host for another life form. That's
exactly right.
Well, thank you so much for spending the time with me today and teaching me all this great information and allowing me to share this with the public. I think that the more people know about this, the more they can make daily choices and be mindful of their microbiome. not just in their gut, but in other parts of their body too.
Oh
And
yeah, I mean, we have an oral microbiome, we have a nasal microbiome. Women should know that you have a breast microbiome, you have a uterine, vaginal microbiome. And I mean, we know, for instance, in some women who have trouble getting pregnant, there are bacteria in some of those women that, quite frankly, are sperm killers.
mm,
And you can actually change that microbiome. We've had a few wonderful successes of women who had sperm killers, and we changed their microbiome, and they have lovely babies now. But it's amazing that come on, you got bacteria that don't like your husband's sperm or whatever. In fact, just as a fun reminder, most cultures have kissing as a part of that culture. There's different ways of doing it, but there is conjecture, and I think it should be more than conjecture, that your oral microbiome is checking out your potential partner's microbiome and making sure that it's compatible.
interesting.
Uh,
That's
in
an interesting
fact,
concept.
yeah,
Yeah.
and in
That's
fact, we
similar with the handshake as well, too, right? Yeah.
handshake as well, and
And just the,
also
the gut instinct that you get from someone when you first meet them, you
and
know?
the personal space. We all actually have a microscopic cloud around us, true. And I call it the holobiome instead of the microbiome. But one of, I think, a reasonable assumption is that this personal space is actually where your microbiome cloud hits the other microbiome cloud and decides, oops, that's where we stop.
Yep.
So think about that.
Fascinating. All right. Well, thank you so much for spending this time with me. It's been wonderful.
Great. And nice to see you. And good luck.
Thank you. And when will your book be out? And how can people reach you?
April 15th is
Okay.
the launch date, tax day, easy to remember. And wherever books are sold, it's on Amazon and Barnes and Noble to order right now, but they can find me at gundrymd.com, drgundry.com, the Dr. Gundry podcast, my YouTube channels, Instagram, and if I don't end up waving at you every day while you're going through your news feed, I've done something wrong, I guess.
You or your team, at
That's
least.
right, yeah.
Super. All right. Well, thank you so much.